you would like to intervene, but you can't stay for the whole thing.
Okay. Order, order. I call James Naish to introduce the motion.
Thank you. I beg to move that this House has considered the potential merits of a statutory duty of care for universities. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Sir Christopher, and I am grateful to the Backbench Business Committee for granting time for this important debate, which follows an e-petition of 128,000 signatures, which resulted in a Westminster Hall on this very topic in June 2023. That, of course, is now 2.5 years ago, and there has been a general election since then. I thought it was important, therefore, that a new cohort of MPs was able to look at and debate this matter. The well-being and safety of university students is, after all, an important issue that attracts thoughtful engagement across party lines, and I have no doubt that today's debate will reflect a shared seriousness of purpose. I was at university in the late 2000s, and despite that feeling an increasingly long time ago, I can still recall a phone call from one of my peers telling me that a mutual acquaintance, a 20-year-old involved in student politics, had taken his own life. 6 years later, 2 more students at the same college did the same, including one who had been to visit a GP only the day before and was told to take medical leave. So we should be very clear at the outset that mental health struggles at university aren't new. What arguably has changed is our understanding and recognition of them. And throughout the 2010s, there was a concerted effort to raise and tackle the stigma associated with mental health struggles through the work of many well-known names, as well as grassroots campaigners like For the 100, who live with the scars of a system that failed them and their families. They should all be applauded for these efforts which have made such a positive difference. And while we know there are ongoing debates about so-called overdiagnosis of mental health issues and special educational needs, we shouldn't lose sight of the impact. An average of 160 suicides among higher education students in England and Wales each year between 2016 and 2023, according to the Office for National Statistics, with Student Mind reporting that 1 in 3 students reported poor mental well-being at the end of the same period. Chair, at its heart, this debate asks a relatively simple question, but with complex implications. Are the health, well-being and safety responsibilities that universities owe to their students sufficiently clear, consistent and enforceable?
On that point.
Or does the current legal framework leave too much uncertainty for students and institutions alike?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. He's making a very important speech. A few years ago, I and colleagues on one of the all-party groups looked at these issues, and what we found was a very inconsistent set of relationships between universities and the local health services. I wonder if he's found that too.
Yes, I thank him for raising that point, and undoubtedly consistency is a really key word here, and it's about how we make sure that how these issues are dealt with through universities or through the associated support services are dealt with in a proper and consistent way, no matter where someone is at university. And so I'm not surprised that his all-party parliamentary group came to that conclusion. What is clear is that more and more students are seeking to be open with universities about their mental health challenges and are seeking support. Over the past decade, for example, the proportion of students disclosing mental health conditions to their university has risen sharply, from under 1% in 2010 to nearly 6% in 2022-2023, and there is anecdotal evidence to suggest that that figure is rising yet again. It is also recognised and accepted by universities that poor mental health is associated with higher dropout rates, poorer academic outcomes, and weaker graduate prospects. And I welcome the work that this government and the previous one has done with the university sector to try to respond, including through the work of the Higher Education Mental Health Implementation Task Force. However, while the scale of demand for mental health support from universities has risen sixfold, the law itself has yet to catch up with the very different set of circumstances and increased understanding that we have today. Chair, at present there is no statutory duty requiring universities to take reasonable care to protect adult students from foreseeable harm. Instead, obligations arise in a fragmented way through health and safety law, equality legislation, human rights law, contract law and voluntary guidance issued by sector bodies. Yes.
I'm grateful to the member for taking the intervention. I'm concerned about medical students. If they have problems in the university themselves, there is a duty of care to them. If they are out with the university at a general practice or at another clinical setting under the aegis of the NHS, there appears to be no statutory duty of care. So would the honourable member agree with me that this is something that we must sort out, in particular in respect of sexual harassment of students?
I thank him for raising that, and I will mention the BMA and its latest survey and work on this issue, but he is right to raise that point. There is, in effect, a patchwork of duties that do not amount to a clear or proactive framework for student protection, and I believe that is something that needs addressing.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does he find it very surprising, as I do, that whereas there are duties of care in workplaces, in prisons, in hospitals, manufacturer to consumer, and in colleges, there is no duty of care that universities owe to students? Doesn't he find that really surprising?
Yes, there's no doubt that it comes as a surprise, particularly to parents who find themselves in very difficult circumstances when their children aren't well, and obviously some of the more extreme circumstances that we are thinking about today. And it comes as a surprise at that point. And so, yes, I agree that it's something, therefore, that this House needs to look at. Most universities do, however, have wellbeing, counselling and mental health support services, which is fantastic. But we have to recognise that provision varies significantly, both in availability and quality.
I really appreciate the honourable member taking the intervention. My constituent Hillary's daughter, Phoebe, took her own life at the University of Newcastle, aged just 20. On the very point that the honourable member was just making, does he agree that the level of pastoral care that universities do and don't provide is a really important factor when making the choice of where to go to university, not just for students, but also for their parents, and that universities should be transparent and honest about the level of support that they do and don't provide?
Yes, I absolutely agree with that point. And the reality is, as I said, things have improved significantly. And I'm not here today to knock universities. But what I am here to do today is to ask the question about whether underpinning that provision that she describes, there should be a level of legal obligation. And what is interesting is that a survey from 2023 of 4,000 students by CALM, the suicide prevention charity, they found that just 12% of students believed that their university handled mental health well. And so in response to your point, I guess the question is, yes, it's important when selecting a university, but when you face those problems, is that provision sufficient? And the truth is that the current lack of legal certainty does result in some dangerous gaps. And this is actually recognised by the Mental Health Task Force's terms of reference, which were published only in December 2025. And it is clear, it says this, I quote, "There is wide recognition among mental health practitioners, charities, those with lived experience and the sector that more could and should be done." And so I don't believe that I'm flagging anything that isn't already known. And yet when it comes to a statutory duty of care, both the sector and the government repeatedly say that one isn't necessary. Now, I beg to differ, that's why I'm here today, as do my constituents Bob and Maggie Aberhart, who are here today, who lost their daughter Natasha to suicide at the University of Bristol in 2018. Both the County Court in May 2022 and the High Court in February 2024 have since ruled that the university caused or contributed to her death. In the Aberhart versus University of Bristol case, the court upheld a breach of the Equality Act for failure to make reasonable adjustments, but declined to find a general duty of care in negligence. Crucially, however, the judge emphasised that the question of duty was one of, and I quote, potentially wide application and significance, and therefore not one the court should resolve incrementally through individual cases. In other words, the courts have signalled that this is a matter for Parliament and for Parliament alone to assess. not for grieving families to seek litigation after harm has already occurred. And that's what is happening. In the absence of legislation, the law develops only after harm has occurred, through costly and traumatic litigation brought by those least able to bear that burden. This matters all the more because, as I stated earlier, the context of higher education has changed significantly. The proportion of students disclosing mental health conditions has increased sharply, and a significant number of students who died by suicide were already known to university support services. This in itself should indicate that more must be done.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Now, 72% of students report that their mental health has suffered as a result of the cost of living crisis, and 1 in 5 have considered dropping out because they simply cannot afford it. So given the ever-rising financial pressures on students, does the honourable member agree that it is time to explore all avenues to protect students' well-being?
I thank him for that intervention, and he's absolutely right. The cost of living only exacerbates a problem that we know existed, and therefore it is right, I think, for this House to be thinking very deeply about this question. And coming to the point that my honourable friend mentioned earlier, it's worth noting that gaps are being recognised by more and more organisations, including the British Medical Association, which last November, following a UK-wide survey of medical students, issued a press release calling for stronger protections against neglect, specifically referencing sexism and sexual violence towards medical students. It urged, and I quote, the government to bring forward legislation that introduces a statutory duty of care on higher education institutions for their students. Now, we should be clear that a statutory duty of care would not require universities to act in loco parentis, nor would it require them to provide unlimited services or assume clinical responsibilities. Rather, it would instead establish a clear baseline that universities must act reasonably with appropriate care and skill when harm is foreseeable and vulnerability is evident, much as is already the case in other regulated settings.
I thank him for giving way, and I come to this place from the university sector, so I really understand the points he is making. I do want to pay tribute to the staff right across the sector who probably right now are supporting students. But he will know the sector is under huge pressure financially. So does he agree a statutory duty should come with statutory funding?
Yes, I think undoubtedly one of the biggest concerns that universities have is how this would be implemented and the actual implications. And I'm not today shying away from the reality that there would be costs for universities. But the question is whether we should put that in place. And I think the point that he's referencing is how should any such legislation be implemented as opposed to whether that legislation is needed in the first place. Indeed, it is important to be clear that a statutory duty of care is not about exposing institutions to unreasonable liability. In fact, clearer statutory duties may benefit universities by reducing uncertainty, helping to focus limited resources on services and support that will make the biggest and most important legal difference, and by providing a shared sector-wide benchmark against which well-being and safety interventions can be properly assessed and, when necessary, judged in a court of law.
And as a Bristol MP, I very much appreciate the fact that he has taken this up on behalf of Natasha's parents, and I have had conversations with the University of Bristol about Natasha's case and also with the University of West of England. One of the issues that does come up is where the parents do fit into this, because students have a right to tell the university they don't want their parents involved. They're treated as adults in that respect, and that can put the universities in quite a difficult position if they do feel that the parents ought to know what's going on. So I just wondered what thought he'd given to that aspect of it.
I think she's right. I think what I'm alluding to today is a level of greyness, and that exists, and therefore we see people falling through the gaps, and our responsibility as a House is to understand whether those gaps, for valid reasons, should continue to exist, or whether actually a change in the law is required to make sure that there is clarity for the university, for the parents and for the students. I'm going to close, but I hope the Minister will address several questions in his response today. Firstly, does the Government agree that the current legal position leaves duties unclear until after harm has potentially occurred? Secondly, does the government accept that reliance on evolving common law places an unreasonable burden on impacted individuals to clarify law through litigation? Thirdly, what assessment has been made of the case for statutory clarity, particularly given calls from organisations like the British Medical Association for stronger protections for students? And finally, if the government does not believe that a statutory duty is the right approach, how does it propose to deliver the clarity, consistency and accountability that both students and universities currently lack, given the Mental Health Task Force's stated aim from December 2025 to, and I quote, fill gaps in areas where more consistency is needed? Surely there is no better way of ensuring the consistent implementation of proactive measures than ensuring a solid legal basis for that obligation. This debate goes to the heart of how we balance autonomy with responsibility and independence with protection in one of the most important sectors of our national life. Provision for students has improved, but in reality the consistency of support and legal understanding remains poor, despite words to the contrary. So it is down to this House, and this House alone, to determine what more could and should be done. I therefore look forward to hearing colleagues' contributions and to the Minister's response shortly.
The question is that this House has considered the potential merits of a statutory duty of care for universities. Can I ask Mehdi?
Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Christopher, and may I congratulate the member for Rushcliffe for securing this important debate on the potential merits of a statutory duty of care for universities. My constituents, Glynwyn and Iona Folks, have been directly affected by this as they tragically lost their daughter to suicide in 2020. Mared Folks was a conscientious and high-achieving second-year pharmacy student at Cardiff University. On the 8th of July 2020, she committed suicide after receiving incorrect exam results. This error led Mared to believe that she could not progress into her third year of studies. By the time the university had sent her the correct exam results, Mared had taken her own life. Mared had a clear path since her time at Ysgol David Hughes Secondary School. All she ever wanted to be was a pharmacist. She worked at local pharmacies during school and university holidays. She became a peer guide for other students, and she participated in voluntary work at a Philippine hospital during her time at university. Sadly, all her dreams and aspirations ended on receiving those incorrect exam results. Many people assume that universities already have a clear legal responsibility to look after students' well-being, particularly where risks are known or foreseeable. However, the extent of any such responsibility remains unclear, and guidance and best practice across the sector is inconsistent. Sadly, this inconsistency results in a postcode lottery in terms of quality and accessibility of mental health care and other services. As public services and universities struggle, the line of responsibility becomes blurred and our young people fall through the gaps. Too many young lives have been lost to suicide, and I believe that something concrete now needs to be done to safeguard. Yeah, okay.
As a pharmacist myself, I actually remember when the news of this came out. My entire sector shares the grief that the family member that we lost what could be an amazing potential pharmacist. And do you agree with me that pharmacy is a little lesser because of it?
I totally agree, and I think the importance of this debate today is that Mared's name is recorded here and is always here in our minutes and in our memories, and I definitely agree with what you've just said.
Would my honourable friend give way? Thank you. I think we all fully appreciate the work that the universities do in order to try and keep and look after the well-being of their students. However, does my honourable friend agree that the lack of investment in public services is really, and public services, by that I mean, of course, the health service as well as others, means that students who have mental health issues, that have been sexually abused, and that perhaps have results and lead to the tragic consequences such as marriage, that our public services really need more investment in order that we can scoop up these young people and look after them a lot better.
Yeah, I totally agree with my honourable friend. Better resourced and better funding for our public services would go a long way to help students who are feeling vulnerable, scared and unable to cope. And as already mentioned, we recognise that students' independence and autonomy as an adult is important, but it's also our role here to make sure that we have safeguards in place so that we can balance their autonomy and also safeguarding them when they're at their vulnerable time.
Really sorry to hear of her constituent's case. When I first raised this issue in the House last May, I did mention that over the previous 10 years, 1 in 4 students had taken their own life in England and Wales. And as regards Natasha's case, when she took her life in April 2018, she was at least the 10th student to have committed suicide at that university since October 2016. So does she agree with me that this is a matter where, as parliamentarians, we cannot just sit aside and do nothing?
No. Thank you for that intervention, and I totally agree, and that's why I appreciate this debate today, where we all can share our experience and make sure that in our term here that we do make that change that we want to see. We all know, and as already mentioned, that universities do try to roll out strategies and action plans, but what this has meant is a patchwork of support and different support services across the university sector. And this simply just isn't working for our young people. It has also led to different approaches in terms of responsibility and accountability for students' welfare and well-being. The lack of clarity has real consequences, and as we've heard in Mared's case, an impact for the whole community and for the pharmacy community as well. When things go wrong, students and families often discover far too late that there was no obligation to act, even where warning signs were present. I therefore want serious consideration given to the concerns of students and their families. And I agree with Mared's parents that the current legal framework is insufficient and reform is urgently needed to clarify institutional responsibilities.
Lizzie Collins.
It's a pleasure to serve here today under your chairship. And I would like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Rushworth, for bringing this important debate on the merits of a statutory duty of care in universities. So, Christopher, the pain of losing a loved one to suicide is unquantifiable, and it stretches out further than you can imagine. I could share any number of heartbreaking statistics that, according to a 2022 Student Mind survey, 57% of students reported mental health issues, or that over the past decade in the UK, a student has taken their life every 4 days. But while statistics matter, sometimes they can distance us from the reality of what's happening, and that's why today I'd rather talk about one of my constituents. His name was Oscar. Oscar was a student at Sheffield Hallam University, and he was living with the effects of a brain injury. And when the university gave him a warning related to his course, he took it to heart and he feared he was being kicked out. Oscar then attempted to take his own life. Now, despite having given explicit consent for the university to contact his parents in the event of medical concerns, his family were not informed of this attempt. The university later argued that this consent applied only to physical injuries, not to an attempt to take his own life. Now, after that first attempt, Oscar should have been supported into treatment. At the very least, his parents should have been told that their son was in crisis, but neither happened. When I spoke to Oscar's parents, Maxine and Gary, they were clear that Oscar wouldn't have wanted to upset them, he wouldn't have wanted to burden them, and he would have needed someone else to make that call. And he gave his consent for that very thing to happen. Oscar later took his own life at his student accommodation. And at the inquest, the university was defensive and obstructive. And I'm sorry to say, Sir Christopher, that this is something I've seen again and again in different organisations, including in healthcare and other places. And it was clear that the focus from the university was on getting the case closed. Maxine described it as the most horrific experience of her life. Whilst guidance exists on how universities should respond to serious incidents, the institution argued that it was not required to follow it. And that's precisely the problem, because guidance can be ignored, but a statutory duty could not. Now, parents like Maxine and Gary don't want to replace the work that has already gone into improving mental health support for young people. They're not asking universities to become parents. What they're asking for is a clear legal framework where there is currently a gap. There were 107 suspected deaths by suicide in students reported in 23-24. And Oscar's case and the response is not an isolated failure. The government's National Review of Higher Education student suicide deaths for 23-24 shows that the same weaknesses are being repeated across the sector. Looking more widely at serious incidents, reports were submitted for only 62% of serious incidents. In 3/4 of investigations, families weren't involved. When action plans existed, many lacked named owners and deadlines. In 71% of reports, senior sign-off was unclear. Now, this is very, very concerning. Processes matter. It really matters that you do investigations properly and that you take action on them. Now, university students fall into a legal grey area. They're no longer protected by the safeguarding frameworks that apply in schools, yet they don't benefit from the clear duties of care that exist in most workplaces. Too many young people sit in that gap at a point in their life where they're particularly vulnerable, and too often the consequences are devastating. If you go to university, it is often at a pivotal time in your life. Students can gain lifelong friends, meet their partners, discover their passions, discover their alcohol tolerance. It's often seen as a carefree period full of independence and possibility. But for many, it will be the first time they're living by themselves, often in a new city, without the networks of support that know them best, without the people who would notice if something is going wrong. And it can be really lonely. When these warning signs appear, it's not always clear who's responsible for acting. One simple practical safeguard, I think, to answer the questions from my honourable friend for Bristol East, would be for every student to nominate a trusted point of contact when they enrol, to be used in the event of a serious concern. That person might be a parent, but it doesn't have to be. University students are adults, and they have the right to exclude their parents. They have the right to make their own decisions about how they live their lives. But this would give them an opportunity to make a good decision and to make sure universities have a path to finding that student support in the event of mental health problems. Universities will contact families after the worst has happened. The question is why organisations don't reach out when there's still a chance to intervene, even when they have full consent to do so, as they did in Oscar's case. Now, while some universities have taken big strides towards increasing access to mental health support, others are lagging behind, and this is creating big inconsistencies across higher education bodies. At the moment, universities operate under a patchwork of guidance and general principles, which has left students, families and staff unsure where responsibility begins and ends. A clearly defined statutory duty would create consistency across the sector and provide reassurance that basic, reasonable safeguards are in place for every student, regardless of where they study. So, Christopher, the pain of a loss by suicide never leaves you, and it causes a tidal wave of grief that ripples out. It's a sad truth that, for so many people, they will never fully realise how many people their lives have touched. It only becomes obvious when it's too late. Suicide is a multifaceted issue, and of course for students the responsibility is not just on universities. Combating death by suicide requires a multifaceted and multi-agency approach. But it would be no bad thing if we all felt a little more responsible for one another. And establishing a statutory duty of care is not about blame. It's about responsibility, consistency, and doing what is reasonable to protect young people before they choose a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Thank you.
Shannon.
Sir Christopher, a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and a big thank you to the honourable member for setting the scene incredibly well. I want to obviously talk and give an Northern Ireland perspective to the debate. Education has devolved, the Minister has no responsibility for it, but the issues that are prevalent to what the honourable gentleman said are the same for us in Northern Ireland. There's also the fact, of course, that 30% of Northern Ireland students actually go to university here in the mainland, and the return is only 4% from the mainland actually study at our own universities. But the issue, therefore, for parents in Northern Ireland with 30% of their students in the UK mainland is really pertinent to this debate. And therefore, I want to speak holistically of the needs of students across the United Kingdom, despite our differing education systems and the educational devolution. Because the issue that is brought to attention by the honourable member today is one that applies everywhere, irrespective of where you live within this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I believe that a statutory duty of care would clearly define clear legal obligations for universities, for students and for teaching staff, so that they can follow a regulation or a way of responding to every case that's brought to their attention. I want to address this if I can, and I will also focus on what students and parents can expect, reaching ambiguity and indeed uncertainty as well. There is no doubt that the mental health and resilience of our young people is not where it once was. I'm not saying we were stronger back in the 60s or maybe even further back, but the fact of the matter is, today I've never seen anything quite like it as an elected representative. Certainly in my years as an elected representative, I can see it getting worse or getting more acute or more serious, and I think that's probably where we are. Where once was a landmark for youth well-being, preference survey of 2020 found that 12.6% of children and young people in Northern Ireland met the diagnostic criteria for common mood and anxiety disorders. And I know this is universities we're talking about, but when we go back to those who are 10 and under, I've got parents and constituents come to me with their children at age of 10 who have anxiety issues, who have mood issues, who have that should be a time of fun, a time of no worries and no burdens hanging over your head. The figure was noticed being approximately 25% higher than rates in other UK nations. So we in Northern Ireland, it would seem, have a bigger anxiety issue. A 2023 survey by the Mental Health Foundation found that nearly 4 in 10, some 39% of young people aged 18 to 24 in Northern Ireland reported that anxiety had affected their day-to-day life to a greater or moderate extent. The 2023 Young Life and Time survey reported that some 45.2% of 16-year-olds in Northern Ireland had probable mental ill health. It is clear that certainty and support are integral parts of education and must be a foundational principle. My thoughts to the Minister, and the question to the Minister, which I can't ask him, even though it's a devolved matter, is when it comes to discussing these issues, it doesn't matter where you live, be it Edinburgh, Penryn, or Bournemouth, or indeed in Coleraine. The issue is the same, and maybe the Minister could tell us what discussions he's had with the devolved administration in Northern Ireland to ensure that we can work this thing collectively together across the United Kingdom. Very happy to, yeah.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. Would he agree with me that clarity is what is required, and that what we need to see is in any statutory duty of care, there needs to be account taken of the potential seriousness of the problem directly to those who are affected, and do it in a way that doesn't impose an extreme burden on universities to implement any statutory duty of care, so it becomes a win-win for both students and for their concerned parents.
Yeah, the honourable gentleman is right that you want to do it, and I would suggest maybe the best way of doing it maybe is in a pastoral way, because I think maybe that might be able to reach out and notice things. I'm not I'm better than anybody else, but I do tend to see the person and perhaps see what the issues are maybe a bit more deeply. In Northern Ireland, the transfer test, or the CAG test, as is known, results stage is coming. So increasingly, parents who are considering what secondary school for their children are not simply looking at academic grades or at after-school clubs or links to vocational education. Parents are prioritising pastoral care in children as young as 11. And the reason for this is they are aware of the mental health pressure on their child from a young age. How much more so when they fly the nest and head to university? It can be a very lonely place. I remember my mother always had sometimes in life when you meet people, see the person who laughs the loudest and who maybe looks to be the life and soul of the party may not necessarily be the person who hasn't got anxiety or mood issues. They could be the person, as my mother would have said, who hangs their fiddle on the door. That means when they're outside they see this person who has no worries, but when he closes that door and goes into his home, then things can perhaps overtake him or overtake her. Yes, there is certainly the stage where we advocate for independent thought and study, but independence is not the same as isolation. And I believe this duty of care will help to address dropout rates. Whilst precise figures for the number of Northern Irish students who leave university specifically due to mental health issues are not publicly available, as universities track overall dropout rates, but generally not the specific self-reported reason for leaving in official stats. One survey found that 29% of students have considered leaving their course, with mental health cited as the most common reason. And the honourable gentleman who set the scene so very well indicated an example of just that. I conclude with this, Mr. Chairman. And none of us are looking for universities to take on roles of parenting. It's not about that, but I think it is about pastoral care. And I think that's where I would probably like to see the focus. But support is a different matter. And I hope this will give us structure for greater student support to be a standard. Thank you, honourable gentleman, for bringing it forward, and to all those who participate. Thank you.
Thank you,
sir. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I want to thank my honourable friend from Rushcliffe for bringing forward this really important debate. Sir Christopher, currently there is no general duty on universities to take reasonable steps to prevent foreseeable harm to adult students. With much of the University of Wolverhampton in my constituency of Wolverhampton West, I've been working closely with the Director of Student Life and designated safeguarding lead at this university to address this issue. Campaigners are not asking for strict liability or for universities to take the form of a parent, but what they are asking for is something fair and simple. Where a university becomes aware of a foreseeable risk of serious harm to one of their students, it should take reasonable steps to reduce and prevent that risk. That duty of care is applied in workplaces and colleges, and higher education should not be an exception. When I raised this matter in the House last May, I did get a response from the Minister for Skills, who said that a duty of care may arise in certain circumstances. Such circumstances would be a matter for the courts to decide based on the facts and context of the case being considered, and will be dependent on the application by a court of accepted common law principles. So, Christopher, I became an MP to be a legislator, and as MPs, we cannot absolve our duty as legislators by saying that it is for the courts to clarify the uncertainties that exist with the law. It is for us not only to clarify the law, but to make it stronger and make it sensible. As a personal injury and clinical negligence solicitor for more than 30 years before I became an MP, I do find it quite shocking, in fact, that the common law does not impose a duty of care on universities to exercise reasonable care and skill for the well-being, health and safety of their students when they are teaching their students or providing education-related services, and also to take reasonable steps to prevent that injury, including psychiatric injury, when such a statutory duty does exist in prisons, hospitals, primary and secondary schools and colleges of further education. This duty of care in negligence also exists in a variety of other situations. For example, doctor to patient, solicitor to client, manufacturer to consumer, and one road user to another. There are very well-established principles of negligence which state that where a duty of care exists and that duty is breached, resulting in injury and or financial loss which was reasonably foreseeable, then negligence has occurred. I bring the tragic case of Abrahart again. In Natasha's case, there was reasonable foreseeability of Natasha's health suffering and having a psychiatric disorder, but it was held that the university was not negligent because the university did not owe Natasha a relevant duty of care. In October 2017, university staff became aware that Natasha was struggling and was experiencing anxiety and panic attacks in response to oral assessments, and in February 2018, a university employee received an email from Natasha saying, "I've been having suicidal thoughts and to a certain degree attempted it." And at that time, Natasha had been diagnosed with chronic social anxiety disorder. But the university continued to mark Natasha down on her assessments, when the court confirmed that there were other ways of eliciting information from the student rather than having these oral assessments. The court therefore concluded that had there been a duty of care in existence, there would have been a breach of that duty, and the university would consequently have been negligent for their actions. Natasha's claim succeeded only under the Equality Act 2010 on the grounds of disability discrimination because the university failed to make reasonable adjustments based on Natasha's disability. But there are other reasons, Sir Christopher, to do with legal costs, to do with time limits, as to why, in order to achieve justice, it should be possible to pursue a claim in negligence where a university has been negligent. Yes, of course.
Thank you for giving way. On that point, I think it's not adequate for us to have to rely on a determination that someone's suffering from a disability because of the mental health issues, because we know that with some cases there will be a history and there will be engagement and there will be a diagnosis of a disorder. But in many other cases it could be something that the student has suddenly feels himself in this situation, and we know that there's not always that long pathway up to suicide. It could be something that is triggered by a particular event. So I just share my concern that relying on the Equalities Act is not adequate in the cases of these students.
The honourable member makes a really very valid and good point. There are going to be cases where a student is vulnerable and where action needs to be taken, but that student may not have been diagnosed with a disability. And it just does not feel fair that the university in those circumstances should not take any steps to deal with the student's vulnerability. So I do agree with what the honourable member is saying. It cannot be right, Sir Christopher, that currently there is no duty on universities to take those reasonable steps to protect the welfare of their students and to take reasonable steps to prevent them from suffering harm when it is reasonably foreseeable that a failure to act will result in harm. Establishing such a statutory duty of care will ensure that the law in this country is brought into line with the position in other common law countries, such as the United States and Australia, but more importantly, give clarity to judges to ensure that justice is achieved, there is access to justice, and universities are also given clarity about their responsibilities so that they can take the appropriate action to prevent the loss of young lives in their institutions. A statutory duty of care for universities would define expectations, embed accountability, and promote prevention. It would not burden universities unnecessarily, but align them with the responsibility already expected in other sectors. So, Christopher, this is about fairness, clarity, and about saving lives. Parliament must act to close this duty gap. Students and their families deserve better. Universities need certainty and the courts need clarity. As parliamentarians, please let this happen.
Before calling Rachel Maskell, can I just say that this part of the debate will have to end by 10:30 so that we can have the wind-ups following. Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Christopher. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair, and I do congratulate my honourable friend from Rushcliffe for setting out the case for a statutory duty of care so well. We know that students face an intersection of pressures throughout their student journey, and we think, of course, the cost of living pressures on students in York. It's one of the most expensive places to be a student, not least with the lack of supply of accommodation, but also the cost of accommodation, and that bears down on students having to take on more responsibilities, particularly often working full-time alongside their studies, and therefore the interplay of having to dedicate more of their time into surviving means that it does compromise their studies, and yet universities do see quite impenetrable to understanding those cost pressures by putting the mitigation in place, whether it's around accommodation that it can provide itself, or indeed looking at how it offsets students who do not succeed because they're having to spend more time on their work. Also, transport pressures bear down on students, and of course all of the array of challenges which young people face today, whether on social media, violence and sexual violence, and of course we've talked about the interplay around neurodifference and of course mental health. And it's really important that there is a statutory duty of care on universities to provide that holistic support around a student. But we must, in this debate, also recognise the challenges which face international students, and they haven't been mentioned yet in the debate, and of course from another jurisdiction, different models around mental health, but also some of the challenges they face, and not least around their immigration status, which is something that I've come across in York as well. And we do need to look at the system, particularly those students who perhaps if we think about maybe an Iranian student today would not be able to return to Iran because of the situation, must be able to change their status here. So there are many interplay sections on international students which we must take on board. But in 2015 in York, we had a real surge in the number of students who took their life. And I do congratulate the universities and the wider community at looking at how they could put mitigation in place. But we know since then 1,108 students have taken their lives so across the country, and therefore this situation does permeate the sector. I'm happy to give way.
As a near neighbour, university neighbour, we both see there's a real patchwork of support across universities of the country. Don't you agree a statutory duty would bring universities to that level playing field and bring them in line with hospitals and schools and employers? As the co-chair of Student APPG, this is something that we've long called for. Do you not think it's now time that we bring forward the statutory duty to support all those students?
I agree, and we must legislate in this place, and that's indeed why we're here. And I particularly want to thank the student unions, because they are the people which are making that case day by day to the employers, to the universities, about the need to provide that statutory duty, but also the services necessary. But I do want to address a different issue which hasn't also been raised in this debate, and that's around mental health services. We know that they are in crisis, and as a result of that, they are not responding to the needs. And often somebody will have a relationship with their mental health services at home, but not when they move to a new area. And we need to see better transition for people who are neurodifferent, but also who experience mental health challenges, to ensure that they are properly engaged with those mental health services. But more than that, I do believe that we need to, because it's always somebody else's problem, isn't it? And that's the problem we've got. So we do need to ensure that those mental health services are provided through a different model, and particularly I would encourage within the student setting through a primary care model as opposed to a secondary care model, because often the thresholds are in the wrong place for proper engagement. If in the primary care setting there can then be a partnership which is formed between the university, the GPs and professionals to ensure that those services are timely. My final point that I want to make in this debate is around students who do not succeed in their students and the welfare services which are wrapped around those students. There must always be a second chance for a student. Perhaps they don't get the scores they need, perhaps the relationships with some of their lecturers and professors are not shall I say, cordial. And as a result, conflict can often arise. We always need a second chance for students so that there is always another avenue to pursue, another opportunity ahead of them. And that is what a statutory duty of care will confirm on students. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. And it's a pleasure to see my Dorset next-door neighbour in the chair. I represent Bournemouth East, which has, across the town of Bournemouth, 3 universities: Bournemouth University, Arts University, Bournemouth, and Health Sciences University. And those 3 universities are committed to achieving 0 suicides. They've got a joint strategy which is intended to make sure that no person loses their life. And before I start, I want to put on the official parliamentary record the names of Paul Milgate, Callum Jewell, and Alec Channing, whose lives were lost, and the love that they were given to their families has also been lost. Universities provide significant support for student well-being, and I think in making that point, it's also worth reflecting on what needs to go beyond this. Because in my own constituency, my constituents are benefiting from studying at Bournemouth University and the duty of care that it provides. And I know that Bournemouth University is going as far as it possibly can to provide this care. But as we've heard in this debate, introducing a statutory duty of care can achieve 2 important things. The first is that you have a level playing field between the higher education sector and other sectors. And the second is that you achieve a consistency in the standards of care that a student and staff can expect across the whole of the country. It's great that we've got fantastic examples in our own constituencies of universities that care deeply and exercise that care deeply towards their students and staff, but we need to make sure that every single staff member and student benefits from that type of care. And that's particularly the case because education opens doors for so many young people. I'm a fervent fan of apprenticeships, and I'm very pleased that the government is moving towards a further investment in apprenticeships. But university will still be a place of great educational importance for our young people. And I'm pleased too that many of them do not regret their decision to choose a degree. Indeed, last year's student experience survey showed that just 11% of undergraduates regretted their decision to take a degree. So we have to make sure that every undergraduate's experience is the very best that it can be. And so in introducing a statutory duty of care, we need to think very carefully about what this would be. There must be clarity on what duty of care actually means in the higher education context, and it has to intersect with and make sense alongside existing safeguarding responsibilities, health and safety law, and anticipatory duties under equality legislation. I'm confident that it can, but it must. We also need to think about who would monitor and regulate compliance. Would it fall under Ofsted? Would it fall under the Office for Students, the DFE, or a new regulatory body? Because universities need clear expectations of pathways for managing risk. And we also need to recognise the critical importance of funding, which has been touched upon in this debate. In April, I spoke about the shortfall that Bournemouth University was facing of around £15 to £20 million, which has now more or less closed. But we also know that around 24 higher educational institutions are at risk, in the view of the Office of Students, of closure. That's a desperate situation for many institutions in our higher education setting. And so if we are to put this duty on to universities, as I think we should also think carefully about what the funding provided would be. And so I want to give one short example of what Bournemouth University does here. There's a university retreat. It provides self-defined crisis support for students Mondays to Saturdays, 2 till 9 p.m. on the Talbot campus. And with no thresholds to access, student mental health support is available in the here and the now for those students whose new needs may be more complex or less complex than allow them to access healthcare support at hospitals or GPs. This particular kind of support from the university provides face-to-face support, particularly in crisis moments. It provides support for those who are stuck on long waiting lists for support so they can get the immediate access that they need. Critically, this is funded by Dorset Healthcare, and it's delivered in collaboration with Dorset Healthcare. So I think that any duty that we provide should provide additional funding through our NHS pathways alongside higher education institutions so that we can get the very best for our students. And in closing, I want to thank the Honourable Member for Rushcliffe for bringing this debate. I look forward to hearing what the Minister has to say in response to the questions that have been put. But in particular, I'm looking for the answer to the exam question, which is it the government's intention to bring forward a statutory duty of care? What would that mean, and how would it be resourced? Thank you.
Eric Kelly.
Thank you,
Stefan, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend for securing this important debate. And as the member for the City of Durham, I'm immensely proud to represent a world-class university. But for many students, moving to a city like Durham is not only a period of excitement and discovery and personal growth, but it can also be a period of vulnerability. They're away from home for the first time, facing academic pressures far beyond A-levels and dealing with situations that they may never have had to deal with before, from problematic landlords, issues with utility suppliers, difficulties getting medication under shared care agreements and loneliness. They're facing situations that can pile on the pressure and exacerbate existing anxieties. And for some, that vulnerability is even greater. Just yesterday, the Unite Foundation reported that well over a quarter of care-experienced and estranged students face financial concerns that directly damage their mental health. And this is way over and above the number of their peers who do have some family support network in place. What we're witnessing is a crisis of scale. Higher Education Statistics Agency data shows that the proportion of students disclosing a mental health condition has seen a 480% increase since 2011. And the Office for Student Statistics found that 25% of final year undergraduates have experienced sexual harassment, a figure we know that is tragically underreported. Sir Christopher, some argue that because students are adults, a legal duty would make universities risk-averse. Well, I disagree. There's no need for a duty of care to be in loco parentis, where every move is monitored. This duty would be a professional standard of care, providing the same level of protection that we would expect from an employer or a healthcare provider. If a student stops attending lectures for weeks on end, or their work shows signs of severe distress, a clearly defined process outlining how the university can and should support the student would potentially help with pressure points before they turn into emergencies. And currently, student safety is a postcode lottery. Support varies widely between institutions, and a statutory duty would replace this patchwork with a single national baseline, and it would help provide consistency with a floor below which no institution can fall, clarity on data to empower pastoral teams to involve emergency contacts without fearing that they're breaching GDPR, and integration to ensure better data sharing between the NHS and universities. But alongside this, we must be mindful of the concerns that have been raised by the University and Colleges Union. While a duty of care would be a huge step in the right direction, we need to be aware of the context into which this new responsibility will be introduced. While a statutory duty of care would help close the gaps in accountability and lead to earlier intervention, there's already a funding crisis in higher education, and simply imposing a duty of care on universities won't work if already overstretched staff and underfunded pastoral teams are simply expected to pick up the pieces. In fact, there could be a risk that introducing a duty of care and thinking this is job done leads to more problems for students. If a duty of care is to be introduced, it must also come with the resources and the funding to ensure that universities can deliver the training their teams will need and can dedicate their own resources into an already creaking mental health support teams. And of course, they need to ensure that their own staff are working in a safe environment. A student's safety shouldn't rely on the terms and conditions of their specific university, but we cannot rely on passing legislation without proper funding to allow universities to deliver the best support for their students. We owe it to every family to ensure that when a young person leaves home for higher education, the higher education sector and government are working hand in hand to ensure that they're protected by a properly funded, well-regulated and easy-to-understand statutory standard of care. Thank you.
You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I'd like to focus my remarks today on recent goings-on at my local institution, the University of Greater Manchester, where there's been, over the past year, credible, detailed and publicly available allegations involving fraud, bribery and corruption, involving not only the senior executives, Greater Manchester Police's major incident team and the University Centre for Islamic Finance. The first detailed reports emerged in February 2025. Only in December did the Office for Students finally confirm that it was an opening an investigation into governance at the university. Students, staff and taxpayers are all entitled to ask, why did it take 10 months? Why did it take a police investigation to trigger regulatory action that happened 6 months later? And how many students were left exposed while the Office for Students hesitated? The delay is indefensible. The OFS's own Condition E governance requirements exist to protect students and ensure public confidence in the sector. Yet these allegations raise questions about whether governing bodies were aware of or fully understood commercial arrangements that appear to benefit insiders at the expense of the institution. When millions of pounds are potentially being paid out in opaque deals, we must ask, were students served or were they being treated as a revenue stream to be monetised without proper oversight? People across Bolton are watching events at the university unfold, wondering out loud what the regulator is doing and when it will act, and they're crying out for certainty. That's why in my letters to the OFS Chief Executive and the Education Secretary, I've called for urgent, transparent action.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. It's a pleasure to serve under you in the chair today, and thank you also to the Honourable Member for Rushcliffe for bringing this important debate. I'd also like to acknowledge the families who have suffered the devastating loss of their loved ones at such a young age. In particular, I'd like to recognise Natasha Abrahart's parents for their campaigning to prevent other families enduring what they experienced. I'm grateful for the time they spent with me sharing Natasha's story and their concerns about how universities support students in crisis. Is it because of families like theirs that we are having this debate today, and we owe it to them to get it right? So, Christopher, while much of today's debate has rightly focused on mental health support, universities' duty of care to their students is broader than this. It encompasses physical safety, appropriate academic adjustments, protection from harassment and ensuring institutional practices don't place unreasonable pressure on vulnerable students. Liberal Democrats believe universities should be held accountable for the support they provide to their students as part of those duties. With the focus on mental health, however, we've heard a lot of numbers and statistics that reporting the mental health challenges, and I won't dig into those further in the interest of time. But certainly from the many meetings that I've had with universities, as well as student organisations, it is clear that many do care deeply about those studying with them and want to provide the best support to all those needing it. But we also know the demands are rising and not all institutions are meeting what we might expect. So the question is how we ensure support services are available, timely and fit for purpose, and that students know how to access them, and how we ensure that institutional practices themselves, from assessment methods to accommodation standards, properly support student well-being. And support can come in a number of forms, catering to different student populations and the locality, amongst other things. But I would hope we would all agree that there should be a consistent approach to the principles of support across all universities, ensuring it is available when and where needed. This is where I believe the University Mental Health Charter, devised by the Student Minds charity, could have a particularly important role to play. Sign up to the Charter is currently voluntary for universities, and there are just over 100 out of a total of 165 signed up. All universities are being asked to sign up to this by the end of this year, and this should really be encouraged to ensure a level of base support for all students from the start of their higher education experience. But to address universities' duty of care responsibilities, a voluntary aspiration must evolve to a rigorous accountability mechanism. That means not just mental health services, but ensuring institutional policies and practices properly support student well-being. Universities must not just sign up to the Charter, but demonstrate they are adhering to a full strategy with clear standards, regular independent assessment and consequences for non-compliance. Providing details and evidence of direct signposting services to students, dedicated individuals responsible for ensuring well-structured welfare checks are carried out, as well as timely delivery of services when needed. So, Christopher, I was going to give a couple of examples from the University of West of England, which I've been really impressed in the way they're showing leadership on this, not as a one-size-fits-all solution, but as food for thought for other institutions and for the Minister. But in the interests of time, I won't go into it. I will just encourage the Minister to look into that. But importantly, the University of West England's approach isn't just about counselling, it's about coordinating across the institution to ensure students with mental health conditions receive those appropriate academic adjustments where necessary, that assessment practices are flexible where needed, and that support wraps around the whole student experience. And it is important, as others have mentioned, to recognise that universities don't solve this alone. We do need much stronger partnerships between universities and NHS mental health services. Students shouldn't fall into gaps between university counselling and clinical NHS provision when they most need support. And when students move away to university, they often lose the continuity in NHS services that may have been supporting them at home. The Student Mental Health Agreement, which facilitates information sharing with consent between universities and NHS services, must be implemented consistently across all institutions. And a final area I would mention that also needs addressing, but is perhaps the hardest to tackle, is the cultural change required amongst students, families and university staff and across universities. It is vital that students who are suffering feel comfortable and safe disclosing issues they may have in order to seek and access the support and services they need. We can only do that by continuing to talk. So in conclusion, Christopher, I think we owe it to the families of those young people who are no longer with us to ensure we adopt a system-wide approach to providing the best access to support and services at universities, as well as bringing about that much-needed cultural change to prevent further tragedies in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. I'm pleased to respond to the debate on behalf of the opposition. I congratulate the Honourable Member for Rushcliffe on his leadership during this debate. And I want to pay tribute to the families who have brought their tragic stories to Honourable Members and informed the debate we've had today. This is how serious problems like the lack of consistent safeguarding for students are brought to public awareness and how change happens. The themes that have come up today shared a clear pattern, I think, and demonstrated the challenge across the whole of the United Kingdom. The main theme was the lack of consistency in safeguarding and care, and the member for Rushcliffe was eloquent in his case that deciding the law through litigation, not legislation, causes uncertainty and distress for families. Equally, I think some of the difficulties, such as the need to recognise students are adults with their own autonomy and responsibility, while parents obviously want to help their children in young adulthood, were also well made. University should be a rich and rewarding experience for every student. It's when so many young people have a chance to grow as people, learn more about their passions inside and outside the lecture hall, and decide what it is that they want to do with the future. It's when many young people begin to discover who they want to become. But as well as... I certainly will, yes.
I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Member. Here with us today is John, a constituent from Nailsea. John's beloved son Max devastatedly lost his life to suicide in 2017 at just 23. Max's mental health difficulties emerged while he was studying for an economics degree at the University of Edinburgh. Tragically, Max is not alone. Do you agree with me this is a crisis of care and we need a funded statutory duty of care to protect other students like Max?
Timothy?
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for sharing that very sad story, and I want to reiterate that I know the bravery it takes families to share these stories, and the importance of Honourable Members repeating them so that we can fully understand this problem. And what I would say is, while my party's position is not yet fully established on whether we need a statutory duty, we certainly need to do a lot better than we're doing right now. Because, as I was saying, as well as being an exciting time, university is when young people can be at their most vulnerable. Under the law, universities do have several legal duties to address. There's obviously health and safety legislation ensuring they minimise accidents and injuries on campus. There's the basic maintenance needed to ensure buildings and public spaces are safe. And in recent years, we've seen universities take more seriously the task of offering mental health services to students and making sure that there is help available. The proportion of students with a mental health condition has increased from less than 1% in 2010 to 5.8% in 2022, and the Office for Students has recorded an average of 160 suicides a year among students between 2016 and 2023. That's an extraordinary statistic. Like other colleagues here today, I've also been contacted by constituents whose families have been affected by this awful trauma. One told me about a relative who committed suicide as an undergraduate. Legal proceedings against the university found that it had failed to make the changes needed to support the student in question. And as we've heard today, my constituent is not alone. So many others have not had the help they needed during a critical time in their lives. These are often complex cases, but universities are obliged to find ways of addressing common problems experienced by students struggling with their mental health. Some students need help to cope with the stress from workloads and exam pressure, moving away from home for the first time, losing touch with friendship circles and family, as well as financial pressures, as we've heard from some honourable members during this debate. In these moments of crisis, universities can and must help. It's also very much the job of universities to make their campus as safe as possible from criminal behaviour. The Office for Students found that 14% of surveyed students reported being victims of sexual violence, and 1 in 4 students reported being victims of sexual harassment. While this obviously reflects wider social problems, universities must still put in place sufficient preventative security measures and offer support for victims of these very serious crimes. I certainly will.
I thank the member for giving way. Many members have mentioned the need for universities to have extra funding to have this statutory duty of care. Does the right honourable member agree that it is not always an issue of funding, it can be an issue of mindset? In Natasha Abrahart's case, the matter could have been dealt with without the need for extra funding, just finding another way to elicit that information from Natasha rather than exposing her to oral assessments when they were aware that she was suffering from chronic social anxiety disorder.
Timothy?
Thank you, Sir Christopher, and I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. So often in these debates, the first response is to say it's a question of money, but actually the reality is often that we need to have proper structures in place, proper policies in place, and accountability so that institutions perform as they should. But I think, as the debate has shown, we also have a much wider culture to address. Some of the culture change we need reflects a wider cultural change in society, but some of it is very specific to universities in the work that they do to make sure that they meet their duty of care. So I agree. Universities have a responsibility to protect their students from discrimination, intimidation, and, in fact, extremism. But over the last several years, this is not what's happened. The last Conservative government passed the Freedom of Speech Act 2023. It was introduced so we can ensure universities are safe for the free exchange of ideas and intellectually honest debate. That legislation is still not properly or fully enacted. For anyone wanting to challenge ideas such as radical gender ideology, students still risk being threatened and punished for their opinions. At the same time, universities have tolerated protests and encampments that have left Jewish students feeling unwelcome and unsafe. Anti-Semitic chants like "From the River to the Sea" and "Death to the IDF" have been met with silence from too many universities, and the protests that I'm talking about have cost £2.6 million in security and clean-up costs across the country since the 7th of October attacks. Despite the brazen mass display of anti-Semitism at these events, only 49 students at 17 universities have been investigated and even fewer punished. And just last week, the United Arab Emirates placed restrictions on its own citizens to limit the number who come here to study at British universities due to concerns that they might be radicalised by the Muslim Brotherhood on our campuses. Islamists are finding more ways to infiltrate British universities and institutions and spread their ideological poison undeterred. Just as we must in all of our public institutions, we need to take on and destroy this evil in our universities. There is no single clear statute in law that sets out a positive duty of care for universities, but there is a reasonable expectation from parents that universities will protect and support the young people they are entrusted with educated. That is why my party welcomes this debate today, and I personally welcome the contribution of everybody who's attended. And I want to thank members from across the House for engaging so constructively as we work towards making universities safe for everyone.
Minister.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I want to begin by recognising the profound pain felt by families who have lost loved ones whilst in higher education. I'd also like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Rushcliffe, for securing this important debate and pay tribute to his constituents, Bob and Maggie Abrahart, whose tireless work for better student support has inspired so many. I also want to acknowledge all the families who have campaigned with courage and determination, including those from the Learn Network, who continue to work alongside us to drive change. Our duty now is clear: to turn grief into learning and action. The government shares the determination to do just that. We want safer campuses and better support for every student. Our approach is to act on the evidence and work with the sector to embed best practice and strengthen institutional accountability. I want members to know and be in no doubt that this government believes that change in this regard is needed. And I'd like to pay tribute to the member for Innismon, who highlighted Mared's story, the tragic loss of life of someone who had such a bright future as a pharmacist ahead of them. My honourable friend, the member for Morecambe, who highlighted Oscar's story, and I recognise that improvement in higher education in these matters is certainly needed. The member for Strangford, who highlighted the UK-wide nature of these concerns and the growing prevalence of mental health conditions that he highlighted as well. My honourable friend, the member for Wolverhampton West, who raises important issues regarding general duties, which I will turn to in my speech. My honourable friend, the member for York, who has highlighted the links to the cost of living pressures that many students face and issues particularly for international students. My honourable friend, the member for Bournemouth East, who highlighted Paul, Callum and Alex tragic stories and highlighted really good practice taking place at Bournemouth University, which I think is a part of the answer to what needs to change. My honourable friend, the member for the City of Durham, who highlighted the brilliant work of the Unite Foundation, who I know well, and cohorts like care experienced students and estranged students as part of this debate. And my honourable friend, the member for Bolton West, who is right to highlight issues around governance concerns and the centrality of accountability when we look at this issue. This government remains committed to improving students' health and well-being. Since the previous debate on this matter, the government published the findings from the National Review of Higher Education student suicides. This landmark review examined serious incident reports and prevention of future deaths to identify patterns and risk factors and looked at institutional responses in depth. And the sector's response was notable. Many universities engaged openly and honestly, showing a clear commitment to share lessons and learn together. To ensure the review's recommendations turn into action, we have extended the Higher Education Mental Health Implementation Task Force. The task force brings together students, families and the sector to work with and challenge institutions to improve student mental health and wellbeing services. Happily give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. It's very kind. Last week was the 7-year anniversary of the death of one of my constituents' sons, Kieran Patel. Unfortunately, the House hasn't given me time to do justice to his experience and story, but his mother, Manju, was in touch with me last week and shared this horrific experience of the loss of her much-loved and talented son, who was a medical student at Southampton University. We've heard many stories, horrific stories, of potential cut short today. Manju and other family members left behind would like to know that the action that the Minister outlines will take place with urgency. The Minister's pointed to a number of previous reviews, debates, discussions. Can the Minister confirm that the Government is seriously looking at this statutory duty and all levers possible to ensure that no parent has to experience a tragic loss like this again?
I thank my honourable friend for highlighting that and really welcome the intervention, given that he's not had a chance to, in the speeches, mention Kieran's story and Manju's experience as his mum, and thank him for making that intervention. We do want to move fast. That's why we published an updated terms of reference for the task force just last month. This sets out the priorities for the task force for the next phase of work, which includes exploring the most effective mechanisms for holding the sector to account. We have also recently appointed Professor Sir Steve West as the new Higher Education Student Support Champion to maintain momentum on these matters. Sir Steve will chair the task force through the next phase of work. However, while universities play an important role in creating supportive environments, they are not and should not become substitute mental health services. Mental health care rightly sits with the NHS. We recognise this as a government and the pressures that are on services, which is why we are recruiting 8,500 additional NHS mental health staff by the end of this Parliament. And many universities are already, as my honourable friend, the member for Bournemouth East, highlighted, delivering to bridge the gap, providing counselling, wellbeing services and crisis support, while working closely with local health partners to ensure students get the right care. The task force will shortly publish a report showcasing 5 successful higher education and NHS partnerships. These examples will demonstrate how greater collaboration can transform support for students whilst helping drive efficiencies across health services. I would urge universities that are not already part of such partnerships to study these models and explore how they can forge an approach that works for their local context. And to stress again, the task force is looking at how to better hold institutions to account and will make recommendations accordingly. I will give way very briefly, yeah.
Just on that task force, can the Minister confirm, does that mean it will look at the effectiveness of the OFS as the regulator for the sector in terms of driving better student outcomes and preventing student harm?
Minister. Thank you, friend, for the intervention. The task force's job is to look at the whole system that sits around universities, and OFS is a crucial part of that, so it will be in scope of the work that they're doing. Turning to the question of a statutory duty of care, higher education providers do have a general duty, as has been highlighted in this debate, of care to deliver educational and pastoral services to the standard of an ordinary competent institution. And in carrying out these duties, they are expected to act reasonably. In addition to general and common law duties, universities also have explicit statutory obligations. For instance, under the Equality Act, they must make reasonable adjustments for disabled students, which include those with qualifying mental health conditions. Providers should plan ahead to remove barriers and act promptly when there are signs of mental health deterioration. Equality and Human Rights Commission guidance also makes clear what good practice looks like. Student-facing staff should be trained to recognise signs of mental health crisis or deterioration and know what steps to take, including helping the student access support. Where a severe or urgent condition is apparent, reasonable adjustments should be made without waiting for a formal diagnosis or medical evidence. And if a student has no diagnosis, but staff are concerned, for example, because of disengagement, missed deadlines, or marked changes in behaviour, staff should consider whether the Equality Act criteria may be met and whether adjustments are appropriate. We also need to be clear about what introducing a statutory duty would mean in practice. It is not just a question of drafting. It would require defining a minimum legal standard for universities, which risks becoming a ceiling rather than a floor. And I would draw members' attention to some of the evidence provided in the 2023 Petitions Committee hearing on statutory duty of care, where a number of stakeholders expressed a range of concerns and scepticism about the unintended effects of a statutory duty of care. The ceiling rather than a floor could drive providers towards defensive compliance and litigation instead of focusing on what really matters, spotting problems early, making timely adjustments and learning from serious incidents. When we talk about the risk of unintended consequences, this is what we mean: confusion about boundaries, reduced ambition and the risk of resources being diverted from proactive support. Almost all students are adults. Introducing a special statutory duty for them could be disproportionate when the evidence shows that students in higher education have a lower suicide rate than others in the same age in the general population. This is not in any way to minimise the problem at universities, and there is one, and I recognise that, but it is to highlight the need for a proportionate response that strikes the right balance. We will continue to monitor the evidence, listen deeply to bereaved families and hold providers to account. But right now, the fastest and most effective route to support safer campuses is for universities to embed the recommendations from the National Review and best practice identified through the task force's outputs, and to strengthen their partnerships with local health services and ensure full compliance with the duties that already exist. Together, I believe we can ensure higher education remains a place of opportunity, enrichment and safety for every student. And I know that these are views wholly shared by my friend, the noble Minister in the other place for skills.
James Nash.
Thank you, Sir Christopher, and I thank the Minister for his response. Firstly, I do want to pay tribute to the gallery and thank everybody for coming. I know for some that will not have made for easy listening, so we really appreciate you being here. Secondly, I know there are members who weren't able to contribute, including the chair of the universities or party parliamentary groups. I want to thank everybody for joining, even if they weren't able to make their points. But we did hear from members all across the country, from England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and of course from some of our great university cities, Durham, York, Edinburgh, Leeds, Birmingham, Bournemouth and others. So thank you very much all for joining. There were some emotional speeches, but I think the overall sentiment was clear, and that is that universities have made good progress on the practical elements. But there is a need to fund universities properly to be able to provide the necessary services. But there is still a place for legislation. And the word consistency was used numerous times. And I would push the Minister to think really carefully about how you provide a level of consistency across hundreds of different organisations across the country if you do not take a statutory approach. We heard examples about incorrect exam results, failure to act on appropriate consent, and a range of other examples. And a statutory level would ensure certainty across the whole of the United Kingdom. There is a gap between public expectation and reality in this area. We know that's the case. And when things fall apart, it leads to confusion, to anger, and a loss of trust in some of our greatest institutions, which are one of our great national assets. So we shouldn't take it for granted that we can allow this to be self-managed. And I would therefore push the Minister and the Department, please monitor the effectiveness of the Mental Health Task Force. It itself already acknowledges there are gaps and more needs to be done. and it may be that they cannot be closed without taking the step that we are talking about today. And so I hope there won't be groupthink within the department, but actually this is something that is constantly asked about and discussed. As I said, and I quote again, surely there is no better way of ensuring the consistent implementation of protective measures than ensuring a solid legal basis for that obligation. I believe that stands. I believe that was the sentiment of MPs across party in this room today, and I hope the government will go back and look once more at this issue. Thank you, Chair.
The question is that this House has considered the potential merits of a statutory duty of care for universities. As many opinions say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. We're now going to move on straight to the next debate, so if people can change places quickly, that'd be great.